Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we are undertaking a meticulous analysis of source material concerning one of the most complex yet tragically overlooked figures in American criminal history, Hadden Irving Clark.
And this material is dense. It's very factual, and it is profoundly disturbing.
It really is. The documents we've synthesized, they provide a chillingly structured overview of Clark's life, his convictions, and then this broader, unnerving scope of crimes he's been alleged to commit.
It's an examination that requires a clear head, and I think an appreciation for the difficult truth that's sort of hidden within his background.
Our task then is to move beyond the sensational headlines. We really need to meticulously examine the background, the psychological decomposition, and the specific methods of the criminal acts that are detailed in these sources.
And critically, this has to include the unsettling connections within his own immediate family.
Yes, and the highly specific, sometimes minute forensic evidence that ultimately secured his conviction in Maryland.
To start, Hadden Clark was born in 1952. He's an American murderer, a suspected serial killer who is currently serving a very lengthy sentence. It's 70 years of imprisonment for 2 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of robbery.
And in the media, which is covered in our source material, he became known by these 2 really graphic aliases, the cross-dressing cannibal and the Rockville Rocket.
Right, and while we have to mention those monikers just for, complete factual representation of the sources, our conversations are going to focus on the reality behind those labels.
And that reality is rooted in a chaotic and traumatic existence. The conversation has to focus not just on the horrific what of the crimes, but on the severe environmental and documented psychological factors that are presented in the source material that shaped his life.
I agree. To understand any of it, we have to start where the sources began. His upbringing in Troy, New York.
Clark was the second of 4 children, and the source material, it immediately presents this really severe paradox when it comes to his early years. To outsiders, to the community, the family was seen as affluent and happy.
Right, it suggests this veneer of stability and, middle-class normalcy.
But that veneer, it was masking a deep and destructive internal instability.
The sources are very explicit about this. Both parents were alcoholics. This led to severe and frequent physical and verbal fights that happened routinely right in front of the children.
For a child, living in that kind of environment where you have affluence on one side, but then this constant, unpredictable conflict and substance abuse on the other, it just creates a specific kind of psychological fracture.
It completely undermines the concept of safety.
And that instability wasn't just in the home dynamic. It extended to the professional life of the father, which had its own tragic arc.
The father held a PhD in chemistry, which, suggests a high level of intellectual capability. Yet he struggled immensely with professional satisfaction. He was frequently changing jobs because he felt dissatisfied with his pay.
And the sources suggest this was a cyclical pattern. The job changes meant the family was forced to move often, which just further disrupted the children's lives.
Constant upheaval. It was all driven by the father's, intellectual restlessness and this perceived financial disappointment, and it added massive strain to an already volatile household.
To compound this tragedy, the father was said to have suffered from manic depression, a condition we would now refer to as bipolar disorder, before he ultimately committed suicide in 1982.
Right, and that suicide happened when Hadden was 30. But the years leading up to it, they were just marked by this continuous trauma of alcoholism and undiagnosed mental illness.
And then the mother's actions. They introduce what is maybe the most specific and unsettling detail that links directly to Hadden's adult psychopathology.
This is a critical point that the source material emphasizes over and over. The mother, when she was intoxicated, would reportedly dress Hadden in girls' clothes.
And this wasn't playful. The sources are clear it was tied directly to her drunkenness.
And she would call him Kristen.
So how do the sources interpret that forced cross-dressing, especially when it's connected to a parent's intoxication? How does that link to the later crime staging?
Well, it's interpreted as a deeply traumatic and defining moment for his developing identity. It ties the concept of cross-dressing and femininity and, identity confusion directly to parental neglect, control, and intoxication.
So it wasn't some kind of organic exploration of identity.
Not at all. It was a ritual imposed by a dysfunctional parent. And this experience, it establishes an early link between vulnerability, violence, and the forced adoption of a female persona. A link that, it surfaces years later when he tries to stage a crime scene, specifically using women's clothes.
It suggests a deeply ingrained, almost compulsive behavioral pattern that's rooted in that childhood trauma.
Exactly.
And beyond the psychological abuse, the sources also indicate that early warning signs of physical violence were there too.
Yeah, as a teenager, Clark was reported to have engaged in the torture and killing of animals.
Specifically, animals belonging to children who had bullied him. So it's not just cruelty, it's retaliation, it's sadism.
It's a documented precursor behavior. We see it often in the developmental history of individuals who later commit more severe, violent offenses against humans.
What's just chilling here is that Hadden's violence, it didn't happen in a vacuum. The family dynamic produced two murderers. We have to talk about his older brother, Bradfield Clark.
Yes, because it sets a truly critical, dark context for everything else.
This is a central point of the analysis. Bradfield Clark strangled a woman in California in 1984. That's 2 years before Hadden's first confirmed murder.
And crucially, the source material notes that Bradfield also committed acts of cannibalism. He consumed several body parts.
The concentration of such specific, severe, and highly unusual violence, cannibalism, and murder within one family unit happening years apart, it's extremely rare.
It speaks volumes about the level of pathology that was bred within that home environment. Bradfield's murder in '84 predated Hadden Clark's first known murder of Michele Dorr in 1986.
Do the sources say if Hadden was consciously imitating his brother?
They don't state that definitively, no. But the similarity in the nature of the offenses, the addition of cannibalism to the murder, it just raises these profound questions about environmental influence, or maybe a shared genetic predisposition for mental illness, or some kind of intergenerational pattern of extreme violence.
It certainly suggests that their shared foundation was just explosive. And moving to Hadden's adult life, the instability continued, and it was made worse by a crucial diagnosis.
Right. He trained as a chef, which, as you noted, grimly explains the weapon used in the Dorr murder. He then joined the U.S. Navy.
But he didn't last long.
No. He was discharged in 1985 after he was officially diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. This is a pivotal moment. It provides a clinical explanation for the paranoia, the disorganized thinking, and the detachment from reality that define his later behavior.
And the timing is critical. The diagnosis came just 1 year before he murdered Michele Dorr.
Exactly. After his discharge, his life just it deteriorated quickly. He held menial jobs, but was often homeless. The sources highlight a pattern of minor crimes and retaliation, multiple arrests for theft, vandalism,
including a conviction that led to a 10-year sentence for robbery, specifically for vandalizing a former landlord's property and stealing from them.
This whole cycle of unstable housing, joblessness, the paranoia fueled by schizophrenia, and these minor retaliatory crimes, it shows a severe lack of integration into society. An inability to manage his mental health.
And this instability was the immediate precursor to the first confirmed murder, which happened when he was under significant personal stress.
Which brings us to a period of profound tragedy starting in 1986.
Yes, we have to transition now to the core criminal acts, beginning with the fate of 6-year-old Michele Dorr. And we should approach this with deep empathy and respect for her vulnerability and the terrible loss her family suffered.
Absolutely. The crime took place on May 31st, 1986, in Silver Spring, Maryland. Clark was living at his brother Jeffrey's home at the time.
And the source material details that he had just been ordered by Jeffrey to move out. So this created acute stress, probably a feeling of betrayal or displacement within Clark's highly paranoid mind.
Into this highly stressed environment walked Michele Dorr, a child of only 6. She was a friend of Clark's niece and just came over looking for her. She was in the wrong house at a moment of extreme instability.
Clark lured her upstairs. And this is where the detail of his professional training comes into grim focus. He used a chef knife, a tool of his trade, to slash her throat.
The sources are clear that the acts that followed, they align with the most depraved aspects of his brother's earlier crime, which reinforces that dark family pattern. He attempted to sexually assault the deceased child, drank some of her blood, and consumed a piece of her flesh.
This level of post-mortem mutilation and cannibalism is thankfully exceedingly rare in criminal cases. It's a deeply disturbing signature of his pathology.
After the attack, he immediately tried a clumsy concealment. He put the body into a duffel bag and drove about 12 miles away to bury her in a park.
That act, transporting a body over a significant distance, it suggests a level of premeditation in the cover-up, even if the initial attack might have been impulsive.
What's particularly tragic about the Dorr case is the issue of delayed justice. Clark wasn't immediately caught or charged for this crime. It was a cold case for years.
And the initial investigation was hampered by the fact that the victim's own father, who was just struggling profoundly with the grief and confusion, actually gave a false confession.
That's right. The sources cite this as one of the major setbacks in the initial investigation. It just adds layers of unimaginable trauma to what that family was already enduring.
So how did they finally connect Clark to her murder years later?
The breakthrough didn't come until after he was apprehended for the second murder in 1992. Once he was a known suspect for a similar crime in the area, investigators revisited the Dorr case.
They focused on the house where the crime happened, Jeffrey's old home.
And the forensic work was incredibly persistent. Even after all those years, police managed to find Michele's blood traces embedded in the wooden floorboards of the upstairs bedroom.
That detail about the blood seeping into the wood and staying detectable for almost a decade and a half, it's a stunning testament to the evolution of forensic science.
It is. Clark himself only led police to her buried body in January of 2008, nearly 14 years after the crime.
The recovery of her remains in 2000, driven by the combination of his later confession and that persistent forensic work, finally brought some resolution.
A resolution that was entirely dependent on his capture for that second later murder.
So let's move forward 6 years from 1986 to the incident that finally ended his criminal spree and secured his capture. The murder of 23-year-old Laura Houghteling in Bethesda, Maryland in October of 1992.
Here, the context is an employer-employee relationship that turned violent. Clark had been hired as a gardener by Laura's mother, Penny Houghteling.
And the sources suggest the catalyst was a specific accusation. Penny Houghteling had accused Clark of stealing tools from her backyard shed.
For an individual experiencing paranoid delusions, like Clark was, a simple accusation of theft from an employer, it can be catastrophic.
It could be perceived as extreme humiliation, a threat to his very limited stability, or part of some larger imagined conspiracy against him.
And that perception of betrayal or extreme disrespect often triggers a disproportionate and violent response.
The attack was brutal. Clark got in through the back door and went to her bedroom. The sources detail that he stabbed Laura to death with a kitchen knife and then, adding a horrific finality, suffocated her with a pillow.
And he followed the same pattern of disposal as the Dorr case. He wrapped her body in a bedsheet, carried her through a nearby wooded area, and buried her about half a mile away.
But his attempt to cover his tracks immediately created the evidence that would betray him. He left behind the bloody pillow, a critical mistake.
Right, and here is where the sources describe a truly bizarre sequence of events, linking right back to his childhood trauma. He tried to stage the scene.
He was aiming to mislead investigators, to make them think Laura had simply left the house alive.
Exactly. He came back to the scene later, dressed in a wig and women's clothes, and deliberately left through the front door. This action is critical.
It reinforces that deeply ingrained behavioral pattern, the one established when his drunken mother forced him to dress as Kristen.
He was using that cross-dressing persona not for pleasure, but as a manipulative tactic to deceive police.
But the deliberate staging failed almost instantly because of the forensics.
It failed spectacularly. Police found the bloody pillow in the bedroom. The key insight was finding a clear fingerprint on the pillowcase.
And that print was immediately matched to Hadden Clark, the eccentric gardener the mother had recently accused of theft.
It was the undeniable physical link that immediately focused the entire investigation right on him.
And the sources provide even more specific, fascinating details about the forensic work here. The Forensic Files episode, Beaten by a Hair, specifically covers this investigation.
That episode details a minute but crucial piece of evidence. In the initial search, police collected the victim's hairbrush, which had about 30 hairs. Analysts meticulously examined them and discovered that one of them was artificial.
A synthetic hair that did not belong to Laura.
Exactly. And that synthetic hair helped solidify the case, tying Clark directly to the scene and supporting the narrative of his cross-dressing attempt at the time of the disposal, or the staging.
It's remarkable how such tiny details can overcome these deliberate attempts at misdirection.
The strength of that fingerprint evidence, coupled with the bizarre detail of the artificial hair, led to his apprehension in November 1992.
And his eventual confession, including leading police to Laura's body 8 months later, was the final piece that connected the dots back to the 1986 Dorr cold case.
Yes, the Houghteling investigation was the domino that finally fell. Once he was in custody, investigators could look back at old missing person files, connect him to the area and the Dorr family, and get the search warrant for Jeffrey's old house,
where they found Michele Dorr's blood in the floorboards.
providing the final, undeniable linkage to that first horrific crime.
So, moving into the next section, on the allegations in the trophy cache. While he was convicted for those 2 murders, the full scope of his alleged crimes, fueled by his own claims, is just vast and unsettling.
He claimed to have killed dozens of people, starting when he was a teenager.
And this is where we have to apply some critical thinking, given the clinical information we have. When you're dealing with an individual diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, particularly one who engages in grandiosity, you have to scrutinize those self-reported confessions.
He was known to seek attention and notoriety.
A perfect example of this unreliable self-reporting is the 2004 letter he sent from prison. He claimed responsibility for the notorious 1974 murder of a then unidentified woman on Cape Cod, known for decades only as the Lady of the Dunes.
He even claimed he knew her identity and had buried evidence from the crime in his grandfather's garden.
That level of detail, burying evidence in a location linked to his family, it sounds highly compelling on the surface.
It does. But authorities immediately expressed doubt. They knew Clark suffered from a severe mental illness that often leads to fabricating or adopting responsibility for high-profile, unsolved crimes. It's a common phenomenon.
And the source material provides the crucial update that ultimately debunked the specific claim, which just demonstrates the importance of continuous investigation.
Precisely. In 2022, the Lady of the Dunes victim was finally identified through DNA as Ruth Marie Terry. Even more definitively, in August 2023, her husband, Guy Rockwall Moldavan, was identified as her killer.
So that confirmed resolution validates the police's initial skepticism. Hadden Clark's detailed claim about the 1974 Cape Cod murder was definitively false.
It's a vital update for separating the sensational narrative created by the killer from verifiable historical fact.
But dismissing one specific claim doesn't negate the possibility of a much wider victim count. And the most compelling tangible evidence suggesting that is the physical discovery he led police to in 2000.
This is the centerpiece of the enduring mystery surrounding Hadden Clark. On December 15, 2000, he led police to the former property of his grandparents and directed them to a specific spot.
And what they unearthed was a single plastic bucket. Inside this bucket was an astonishing and gruesome collection, over 200 pieces of jewelry.
And crucially, they were able to establish a definitive link to one of his confirmed victims. Laura Houghtelin's high school class ring was among the items.
Which proved the cache was directly related to his confirmed murders.
Yes. And Clark called these items trophies taken from his victims.
So what does a collection of 200 pieces of jewelry imply?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of serial crime, collecting mementos or trophies is a classic behavioral signature. It implies a pattern of collecting items to relive the crime, to assert dominance over the victim, or just to serve as a physical reminder of the power he wielded.
So the volume, given that 2 confirmed victims yielded 200 pieces of jewelry, it strongly suggests a far wider scope of offenses.
The author Robert Keller, whose work we analyzed, focused intensely on this collection. He noted that the sheer quantity of the stash suggested many more victims.
So why wouldn't these items have been recovered if they were linked to other identified missing persons?
The challenge is connecting a single, generic piece of jewelry, like a necklace or a ring without an engraving, to a specific missing person after years have passed, especially if their disappearance wasn't immediately linked to foul play.
It's a haunting thought. The jewelry serves as this physical proxy for potentially hundreds of undetected acts, reinforcing his status as a suspected serial killer, even without additional convictions.
And the mystery lies in the fact that those 200 pieces of jewelry may represent 200 lost stories.
It is a heavy thought. The crimes and the ensuing mystery have naturally attracted extensive attention. Let's transition to how the public has learned about this case through the media coverage.
The sheer volume of material dedicated to Hadden Clark reflects the disturbing nexus of mental illness, sexual deviance, and extreme violence that are all present in his case. The combination of the family pathology, the cannibalism, the cross-dressing element, and the mystery of the trophy cache guarantees sustained interest.
Our sources cite several key publications that establish the narrative. Adrian Hevel's Born Evil, published in 2001, provided an early foundational narrative on Clark's offenses.
And Robert Keller's True Crime, American Monsters Volume 3, published in 2013, highlighted Clark as one of 12 horrific American serial killers, really emphasizing the role of his cross-dressing and the cannibalistic acts.
Television has been instrumental in disseminating the forensic details. Forensic files cover both major crimes, which is pretty rare for a single perpetrator.
It is. The episode Beaten by a Hair focused meticulously on the Laura Houghteling case. It detailed the critical role of that fingerprint on the pillowcase, and then went into the intricate analysis of that single artificial hair, which confirmed his staged appearance. It showed how science overcame his deception.
And Forensic Files also covered the Michele Dorr case in the episode Dressed to Kill, highlighting that long road to justice, the tragedy of the father's false confession, and the eventual discovery of the blood evidence.
The investigation discovery series Evil Eye, which also used the title Dressed to Kill, focused heavily on the Houghteling disappearance, portraying Clark's double life as the family gardener and eccentric crossdresser.
The UK's Channel 5 series Born to Kill took a different, more psychological angle. That episode focused specifically on his formative years, the alcoholic parents, the father's mental illness, and those forced cross-dressing rituals.
That focus aligns directly with the deeper analysis we're doing today, showing how the source material repeatedly tries to trace the adult pathology back to those early traumatic foundations.
And the media coverage is clearly ongoing. We see that sustained interest reflected in a recent, extensive 7-episode documentary series aired by Investigation Discovery as recently as September 2024.
Other series listed include Crime Stories, Mugshots, and The Investigators. The details of his crimes, the schizophrenia, the peculiar patterns, the cannibalism, the mystery of the trophies, they continue to be revisited and analyzed across various platforms.
And this lasting interest extends deeply into the world of audio and podcasting. The true crime genre consistently returns to this case.
The last podcast on the left, for instance, dedicated a 2-part episode to him in 2019. The materials suggest this trend will continue, as evidenced by a 2025 episode scheduled for Small Town Murder.
This intense, continuous media consumption forces us to confront a recurring question. Given the detailed, traumatic nature of the events, what influence does the repeated consumption of these specifics have on the public perception of severe mental illness, like paranoid schizophrenia, and how it intersects with criminal accountability?
It raises a profound societal challenge, doesn't it? How do we acknowledge the role of a severe psychological disorder in a perpetrator's life without minimizing the responsibility for the horrific acts committed against the victims, Michele Dorr and Laura Houghteling? The sources consistently try to balance the need for psychological context with the brutal facts of the crime.
We have thoroughly explored the source materials, painting a detailed and tragic picture of Hadden Clark's life. It was defined by a chaotic upbringing, a severe clinical diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia, compounded by his father's struggle with manic depression.
Culminating in a span of horrific and documented acts from 1986 to 1992 that led to his conviction for the murders of Michele Dorr and Laura Houghteling.
The sources ultimately reveal Clark as an individual whose profound psychological damage rooted in that childhood trauma led to an escalation of violence and these extremely unusual criminal signatures,
Tragically including cannibalism.
So what does this all mean for the history of the case? Clark is currently serving his sentences at Eastern Correctional Institution. His apprehension brought a measure of justice and resolution to the families of those 2 confirmed victims.
However, despite the definitive convictions, the legacy of Hadden Clark remains tethered to the profound ambiguity of that trophy stash. The discovery of over 200 pieces of jewelry, labeled by Clark himself as mementos from his victims, suggests a dark and potentially vast scope of victims that authorities have never been able to fully identify.
This unsolved mystery is a haunting element that remains intimately connected to the evidence secured in the initial confirmed crimes.
It leaves us with a final provocative thought. While forensic science successfully closed 2 horrific chapters, the artifacts Clark amassed during his years of hidden criminality mean that the true toll of his violence may never be entirely known, leaving potentially many questions unanswered for other families.
We appreciate you joining us for this in-depth exploration of the source materials on Hadden Clark.
Thanks for listening.